A couple of months ago, I got a text on a Thursday from a church that I knew. They said, hey, our pastor's going to be unexpectedly out of town now. He had a family emergency he needs to take care of. Hey, would you be willing to lead worship on Sunday? And I started thinking, I've only really led in my church primarily for the past year or two. I've led a couple other places, but it made me go through the process as I prepared to do this of leading worship at another church. And there were several things that I realized I needed to do in order to lead well at that church. So if you are slated to lead at another church, or you do it frequently, or you're leading at a camp or a conference or something, here are some things that I thought about as I prepared to lead at a church that wasn't my own church. And the first thing I thought about was this. Primarily when people ask you to lead worship, they're talking about the musical side of it, right? And so that's the first thing that comes to mind for me. Although, when I lead worship at my church, I'm not just thinking about music, I'm thinking about prayers and how to order the service and scripture reading and so on and so forth. But I think about songs, and people probably want you to come and lead the music at their conference or their camp or their church or whatever. And so thinking of songs, the first question you ask yourself is, what songs am I going to lead? And you have some different routes you can go, right? You can just think, well, maybe I'll just pick from the CCLI top 20 or something because people know those, or they should know those. Or maybe you think, I'm just going to do songs that I like because I want to teach these people some good songs. Or maybe you're thinking I know what this church needs, and I am going to pick some songs that kind of teaches them a message. They always worship in this way, but I really think they need to be worshiping in this way. So I'm going to try to use my Sunday to just pull them in that direction. Here are my thoughts, though. When I pick songs, when I'm not at my church, the first thing I ask the person who asked me, will you lead worship at this function? I say, okay, what songs do your people know? I want to pick songs that the people I'm leading in worship know. And why do I do that? It's because I think about the purpose of corporate worship. This is a theological commitment for me for corporate worship, is that when we gather together, the purpose is, one of them, is to, obviously to glorify God, but also to edify each other. Specifically when it comes to music, we do that through the teaching and admonishing of one another through singing. Colossians 3:16, you know it by now. And so that theological direction is not just true when I lead in my own church, it's also true at any worship gathering that I lead. So whether it's the church that texted me on Thursday, or I think back to a Christian school that was having some I don't even know what you would call it, some get together at a park somewhere, and they were like, hey, can you come and lead worship for us? I sent an email to the person who leads worship at chapel at that Christian school and said, hey, what are some of the songs that you've been singing recently? What songs are the students going to know? It's hard enough to lead students in worship, even at a Christian school. It doesn't automatically mean that they're Christians. And so I want to give them the best chance I possibly can to get them to sing along as we worship together. And I'm not doing it just for the sake of getting them to sing. If I just wanted to get them to sing, I'd probably do a bunch of pop songs, right? But I want to pick from the list of songs that they already know so that they can sing with me, because I believe that that's the purpose of corporate worship. So this isn't the time to introduce 5 new songs to this church. This isn't the time for you to make a statement on what kind of songs you think should be sung in a church. I mean, don't go against your conscience as you are leading the songs. Don't just sing, if you don't sing Bethel Hillsong songs at your church, don't go and do them at another church just because they don't care as much about that. But you are there to guest lead worship. So just show up, sing some songs that they know, and I guarantee you that it will be a more edifying time for everyone when you show up and you just pick 5 songs that they know. Now, after I think about picking what songs I'm going to sing for the service, and I check in with the leaders of that church and say what songs have been working well here, then I go on to thinking about the logistics of the service. As I plan how I'm going to structure my time of worship, depending on my involvement in the process of structuring that. Sometimes somebody asks you and they just want you to basically take over. They're not the pastor of the church. It might not even be a Sunday morning thing. They're just we want to have a time of worship. If that's the case, I'm not just going to get up and sing like 3 songs and be like, hey, it was a fun little concert time here. I want to plan something meaningful. But if you are coming into a church if you're coming into a church, they have a way of ordering their service. So get that information so you know what sort of structure you have to work within. And once again, this isn't your time to like change the structure just for the sake of changing the structure. I know I have a lot of opinions on how worship should be structured in our church, and I might incorporate some of those things. Like there are things that you can slip in without changing the entire structure of someone's church service. But I just want you to remember that you are a guest there. I need to remind myself of this sometimes, especially as someone who has strong opinions on how worship should be led in the church. You're a guest here. This isn't your time to like make some huge statement. Work within the confines that you have, do it in a biblical way, and be obedient to following their plan for their service. You aren't the shepherd of their church. You've just been asked to come in. So you aren't responsible for how this church worships. You're going to be leading them on Sunday, but the overall vision of their worship gathering belongs to the elders in that church. So submit to their leadership if you're going to lead at their church. And so we want to ask things like, what is the general order of your service? How do you usually do things? How many songs do you usually do? Or we might ask, what other elements of worship are happening? Like, do you have somebody come up and do announcements at the beginning of your service? Do you have like a prayer in the middle of your service? Is there a song after the message? Is there a time of giving where like people come? I don't even know if people do this anymore, but it just popped into my head. Do people still come up with like a basket and pass it between the rows? I don't know if people do that or not anymore. But if that happens, like, do I need to plan a song for that? Because those are going to give you direction in how you plan your part of the service. If you are thinking, okay, not only do I need to pick 3 songs, but we're going to do 2 songs at the beginning, and I'm going to be the one that opens the service, so I'm going to have some scripture to read, and then after the second song, someone's going to come up and pray, and then I need to know, like, what kind of prayer is that? Is it like a prayer of confession? Is it just a general prayer? Because that's going to lead into the next part of the service, which is going to be another song. So I need to pick an appropriate song there. So make sure you know logistically how the service is set up so that you can support the structure that's already in place. From there, I like to move on to tech details. These are just like the super practical things that you need to know. What is going to be provided for me when I get to that church or to that camp or whatever? Or do I need to bring my own stuff? So think about things like, do I need a guitar stand? I always forget a guitar stand. Or I always remember to bring a guitar stand and then I forget it at the place. That happens like 75% of the time. And then you have to do that weird thing where you like prop your guitar case open and lean your guitar there, or like go and get into your guitar case in the middle of the service. Don't do that. Bring a guitar stand. What's the sound system like there? And sometimes you have to kind of read between the lines, especially if you're talking to someone who doesn't know much about sound. It's like, sometimes I read between the lines and I'm like, this is going to be a disaster. They're like, yeah, I think we got it. We got one of those powered mixers and a couple speakers and you should be good. Or maybe you'll learn that you need to bring your own sound system. And in that case, ask them about power. I just think of like, sometimes we're at pavilions or something. It's like, is there power there? Like if we show up to an outdoor venue and there's no power, we're going to be in trouble. So that's kind of on them to, like, if they're the one booking the place, like, they need to make sure that that stuff's available. And then if they say, yeah, we have everything that you need, make sure that you communicate your needs. Like, I would tell them, okay, I need a direct box. I'll bring my own instrument cable, but I need a direct box that's plugged into, a soundboard or whatever. And I need a microphone and a microphone stand. Like, for me, that's like the bare minimum. I show up, plug my acoustic guitar into the direct box, sing into a microphone. I can pretty much get by with that. But if you have other needs for whatever reason, then tell them those things, especially if you have a whole band coming with you. And if you are talking to the sound guy, here's a tip. Be really nice to the sound guy. Even if it seems like they don't really know what they're doing, just be nice to the sound guy. There's no reason to be mad at the person who's running sound. Maybe there is a reason to be mad, but it's not going to help in the long run. So just be nice to them. You can suffer through bad sound for one worship leading session. And so that is literally like, if there's a sound person, that I don't know, that I haven't met before, that is literally one of the first things that I do when I get to that church. I introduce myself to the sound person and establish a connection with them. And by the way, if I'm running sound and somebody else is leading worship, then if I'm the sound person, then I go to them and establish a good relationship with them, all right? That is like one of the most important relationships that you can have during the morning. I mean, you want to be in touch with the other leaders at the church, obviously, as well, but you want to make friends with the sound person. So be nice to them. Introduce yourself. Say, hey, I'm Spencer. I'm here to lead worship. Is there anything that you need from me, from my end, or any questions that you have about what I need? Stuff like that. Now, when it comes to the day of, this is my biggest piece of advice. It is to show up early. There's nothing worse than showing up even a half an hour before the service starts or the gathering starts, and you're running around and it's supposed to start at 10 a.m. or something, and you're like, well, I just showed up and I don't have much time to get stuff put together here, and you are stressed out, and then you have to go from that stressed out state of trying to figure out how you're going to set up everything to leading worship. I can't stand that. And sometimes you're forced into that situation where it's you only have the location for a certain amount of time, or what happened to me when I was leading at that other church that I talked about. I came straight from my church's service to their service, and I only had a half an hour. That is not my preferred way to do things. I'd rather show up at least an hour early, do a sound check, run through a couple songs, make sure everything is good to go, and have a half an hour to just collect myself before I lead worship. So if possible, show up at least an hour early. And then you might ask yourself, well, what am I going to do with that extra time then? Well, I think it's important to get to know the people that you're leading. Actually interact with the people at the church that you're at. Don't go sit in some back room somewhere. Don't just sit in the front row awkwardly avoiding everyone. Position yourself in a place where you can interact with people. Even those 30 minutes before the service, or 25 or whatever, before you need to get back up on stage. Those can be such powerful times of just building trust with people that you're about to lead. I think we take it for granted sometimes, when we're at our own church, the amount of trust that we've built with people. They aren't surprised when Spencer gets up on stage to lead the songs. They're ready to follow how I lead because I've been leading here for the past 4 years. They know what to expect. But think about if you showed up and there was some new person on stage, you would be a little bit, I don't know if skeptical is the right word, but you would be cautious, trying to figure it out. But imagine if they walked up to you in the lobby beforehand and said, hey, I'm Spencer. I'm leading worship here today. What's your name? Right? Introduced themselves. And then oh, you see them up on stage. That's Spencer. He's going to be leading worship today. There's just a different shift that happens in their perception of you, and then they're more likely to accept your leadership as you lead them in worship, and it just creates for a better worship gathering. And then not only will they trust you, but you'll actually know the people that you're leading. Even if you have relatively surface level conversations, I'm not saying you have to get into all the details of people's lives, but just knowing the people that you're leading helps you lead them better. And that's why I always feel like I'm able to lead better at my home church, because I know the people that I'm leading in worship. I know what's going on in their lives, and I think you should know what's going on in the lives of the people at your church so that you can cater your worship leading to their specific needs. And maybe that directs what sort of passages you pick out. Not that our worship services are all about the people in our church, but it is a little bit about the people in our church, right? What is the goal of us gathering to worship together? It is to glorify God, but it's also to edify each other. So we need to know what's happening in the other people's lives in our church so that we can edify them more specifically. So the better you can know people, even if it's in a different church, the better you can know them, the better you'll be able to lead them more specifically, and it won't just be this general set of 4 or 5 songs that you picked out with random scripture readings. Now, if you are getting ready to lead somewhere that is not your own church, I've got a checklist. It's called the First Time Worship Leading Checklist, and I originally created it for first-time worship leaders. I'll link it down in the description below. But as I looked at it this week, I was like, you know what? This really makes sense for people, even if you're leading at a different church, because it talks about a lot of the things that I talked about in this video. It's almost as if you are leading for the first time, at least logistically, trying to figure out the order of service, what songs to pick out, so on and so forth. So if you are leading somewhere coming up, make sure to check out the first-time worship leader checklist. Even if you aren't a first-time worship leader, it'll help you out as you prepare to lead at those places. Other than that, until I see you in the next video, keep leading worship well.